The nobleman's signet ring pressed cold against Lady Lillian Rosewood's skin as she clutched it beneath the frayed wool of her borrowed shawl, her breathing shallow in the dusty afternoon heat of Rico, Colorado. The year was 1878, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston to escape a marriage arranged by her uncle, a union that would have bound her to a cruel man twice her age who sought only her family's fortune and influence. At 22 years old, she had made the desperate choice to abandon everything she had ever known, trading silk gowns for simple calico, trading her lady's maid for solitude, trading her name for anonymity. The mining town sprawled before her like a promise of freedom, its wooden buildings weathered by mountain winds, its streets filled with miners, merchants, and men who would never recognize the carefully cultivated manners that still clung to her despite her best efforts to shed them. She had been in Rico for 3 days, sleeping in a cramped room above the general store, paying for her lodging with the few coins she had earned washing dishes at the boarding house. Her hands, once soft and carefully tended, now bore the evidence of labor, reddened and rough from hot water and lye soap. The transformation should have been complete, but she knew there were tells she could not quite erase. The way she held herself too straight, the educated cadence of her speech, the occasional slip into formal language that marked her as different from the other women in town. The afternoon sun beat down on Main Street as she made her way toward the Mercantile, needing to purchase thread to mend the tear in her only spare dress. The wooden boardwalk echoed under her worn boots, and she kept her gaze lowered, a habit she had developed to avoid drawing attention. Men tipped their hats as they passed, and she offered the briefest of nods in return, never lingering, never inviting conversation. She had nearly reached the Mercantile when she heard the commotion. Raised voices carried from the direction of the livery stable, and despite her intention to remain inconspicuous, curiosity drew her attention. A crowd had gathered, and through the gaps between shoulders and hats, she glimpsed 2 men facing each other in the street. One was clearly drunk, swaying on his feet, his face flushed with anger and whiskey. The other stood calm and still, his hands hanging loose at his sides, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat brim. "You cheated me," the drunk man shouted, his words slurring together. "That horse was worth twice what you paid." "I paid what we agreed on, Harlan." The second man's voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that commanded attention without needing to rise in volume. "You wanted quick cash for your gambling debts. I gave it to you. The deal was fair." Lillian found herself drawn closer despite her better judgment. The sober man was tall and lean, his frame suggesting strength built from hard work rather than excess. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy: worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and a bandana tied loose around his neck. His hat was pushed back slightly, revealing dark hair and a face that might have been carved from the same granite that formed the surrounding mountains. There was something in his bearing that spoke of confidence without arrogance, of capability without cruelty. The drunk man lunged forward, swinging wildly. The cowboy sidestepped the clumsy attack with practiced ease, catching Harlan's wrist and redirecting his momentum so that the drunk stumbled and fell to his knees in the dust. The crowd murmured, some with approval, others with disappointment that the confrontation had ended so quickly and bloodlessly. "Go sleep it off," the cowboy said, releasing Harlan's wrist, "before you embarrass yourself further." Harlan struggled to his feet, spitting curses, but 2 of his friends moved forward to lead him away, apologizing to the cowboy as they went. The crowd began to disperse, returning to their business, the excitement over. Lillian realized she had been staring and quickly turned away, but not before the cowboy's gaze swept across the onlookers and landed on her for the briefest moment. Even that fleeting glance sent a strange flutter through her chest. She hurried into the mercantile, scolding herself for the reaction. She could not afford to draw anyone's attention, and certainly could not afford to develop any sort of fascination with a local cowboy, no matter how capable he appeared. The interior of the mercantile smelled of leather, tobacco, and dried goods. Mrs. Patterson, the proprietor's wife, greeted her with a warm smile. "Miss Lily, how are you settling in, dear?" Lillian had given her name as Lily Ross, close enough to her real name that she would respond naturally, different enough to provide some protection. "Very well, thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I need some thread if you have it. Dark blue would be best." "Of course, dear. Let me fetch it for you." The older woman bustled behind the counter, her movements efficient and practiced. "You're looking for work, aren't you? I heard you've been helping at the boarding house." "Yes, madam. Any honest work would be welcome." Mrs. Patterson pursed her lips thoughtfully. "The schoolteacher position is still open, you know. Mrs. Whitman mentioned you seemed well-spoken. Have you had much education?" Lillian's heart sank. The last thing she needed was to draw attention to her education, which had been extensive and expensive, the kind reserved for young ladies of considerable means. "Some, but I'm not certain I'm qualified to teach. I've no experience with children." "Nonsense. Anyone who can read and write well is more qualified than most folks around here. You should consider it." Mrs. Patterson placed the spool of thread on the counter. "That'll be 5 cents." Lillian counted out the coins carefully, aware of how few remained in her small cloth purse. She would need more work soon, or she would be unable to pay for her room. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'll consider the teaching position." As she turned to leave, the door opened and the cowboy from the street entered. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized. His eyes were a surprising shade of gray-green, like sage after rain, and they held an intelligence that made her instinctively straighten her posture before she caught herself and deliberately relaxed. "Afternoon, Quinn," Mrs. Patterson called cheerfully. "What brings you to town?" "Need some supplies, Mrs. Patterson. Salt, coffee, and lamp oil if you've got it." His voice held the same calm quality she had noticed in the street, and she detected the faint trace of an accent she could not quite place. Not quite Southern, not quite Western, something in between. "Of course. Let me gather those for you." Mrs. Patterson disappeared into the back room, leaving Lillian and the cowboy alone in the front of the store. She meant to simply nod and leave, but he spoke before she could move toward the door. "You're new in town." It was not a question, but she answered anyway, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "I arrived a few days ago. Quinn Jameson." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture of polite introduction rather than the exaggerated flourish some men employed. "I run a ranch about 8 miles north of here." "Lily Ross." She offered him a brief smile, hoping he would not engage her in further conversation. "You handle yourself well for someone new to these parts," he observed. Most Eastern ladies would have fainted or screamed during that scene in the street. Her breath caught. How had he known she was from the East? She had worked so hard to soften her accent, to adopt the more casual speech patterns of the West. "I'm not certain what you mean." His expression did not change, but something flickered in those sage-colored eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or simple observation. "You stood your ground when Harlan went down, didn't flutter or fuss. That takes a certain kind of strength. Or perhaps simple curiosity," she said carefully. "I meant no offense by watching. None taken." He paused, and she felt his gaze take in details she would rather he did not notice. The quality of her speech despite her attempts to mask it, the way she held herself, the unconscious grace in her movements that years of deportment lessons had ingrained. "You looking for work?" The directness of the question startled her. "I am, actually. Why do you ask?" "My cook quit last week. Decided mining was easier than dealing with ranch hands. I need someone who can prepare decent meals for 6 men, 3 times a day. The pay is fair, and there's a small cabin near the main house you could use. It's private and secure." Lillian's mind raced. A job on an isolated ranch, away from the town where people might ask questions, where news from the east might eventually arrive. It seemed almost too perfect, which made her immediately suspicious. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Jameson, but you don't know anything about my cooking abilities." "True enough. But Mrs. Patterson speaks well of you, and I'm a good judge of character. You've got honest eyes and capable hands." He glanced down at her reddened, work-worn fingers. Those aren't the hands of someone afraid of hard work. She felt an unexpected flush of embarrassment at his attention to her hands, so different now from what they had been mere weeks ago. "I would need to think about it." "Of course. Take your time." He reached into his vest pocket and produced a small piece of paper and a stub of pencil, writing quickly. "This is the location of my ranch. If you decide you're interested, come by any day this week. I'll be there." She took the paper, careful not to let their fingers brush, though she was acutely aware of the space between them. "Thank you for the offer." Mrs. Patterson returned with Quinn's supplies, and Lillian took the opportunity to slip out of the store, her heart beating faster than it should. The sensible part of her mind warned against accepting employment from a stranger, no matter how honest he appeared. But the practical part reminded her that she needed work, and soon, or she would have no choice but to move on to another town with even fewer resources than she currently possessed. That evening, as she sat in her small room above the general store, she examined the paper Quinn had given her. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, the letters formed with care. She traced the simple map he had drawn, showing the road north out of town and the turnoff to his ranch. Beneath the map, he had written, "Fair wages, honest work, no questions asked." Those last 3 words made her decision for her. No questions asked. Either he had guessed she was running from something, or he simply made it his policy not to pry into the pasts of his employees. Either way, it was exactly what she needed. She spent the night mending her dress and washing her other set of clothing, preparing for the journey to the ranch. In the morning, she paid Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house for her last few shifts of work, collected her small bundle of belongings, and asked the livery owner if she could walk alongside one of the freight wagons heading north. He agreed readily enough, and by mid-morning she found herself on the dusty road leading away from Rico. The landscape was breathtaking in its harsh beauty. Pine forests climbed the slopes of mountains that still bore snow on their highest peaks despite the summer heat. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and the air smelled of sun-warmed sage and pine resin. It was so different from Boston, from the carefully manicured gardens and the endless gray of city streets. Here, everything felt vast and wild and possible. The freight wagon turned off at a different ranch before she reached Quinn's property, so she continued on foot, following the landmarks on his map. The sun climbed higher, and she was grateful for her shawl despite the heat, using it to shield her face and neck from the burning rays. The signet ring still hung on a thin chain beneath her dress, hidden but ever present, a reminder of who she really was and what she had left behind. She spotted the ranch just before noon. It was more substantial than she had expected. A solid timber house with a wide porch, several outbuildings including a large barn and extensive corrals where horses moved in lazy circles. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and she could see several men working near one of the outer fences. Everything spoke of a well-run, prosperous operation. As she approached the main house, a dog barked from somewhere behind the barn. A moment later, Quinn appeared around the corner of the building, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped when he saw her, and something that might have been surprise crossed his face before settling back into that calm, unreadable expression. "Miss Ross." He walked toward her, his long stride eating up the distance between them. "I didn't expect you quite this soon." "I hope that's not a problem." She suddenly felt uncertain, standing in the yard with her pathetic bundle of belongings, dust coating her skirt and face flushed from the walk. "Not at all. I'm glad you came." He glanced toward the house. "Let me show you the kitchen and the cabin. If you're still interested after seeing them, we can discuss terms." The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped, with a large wood-burning stove, ample counter space, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. It was cleaner than she had expected, suggesting that Quinn and his men had been making an effort to keep things tidy in the absence of a proper cook. The cabin he showed her next was small but sturdy, with a good bed, a table and chair, a small stove for heat, and even a few books on a makeshift shelf. The previous cook was a man named George. He left most of his things when he quit, said he was traveling light to the goldfields. "You're welcome to anything useful." Quinn stood in the doorway, giving her space to explore the single room. "There's a good lock on the door, and my men know better than to bother anyone who doesn't want bothering." Lillian ran her hand along the back of the chair, testing its sturdiness. The cabin was more than adequate. It was actually quite comfortable by frontier standards. "What would my duties be exactly?" "Breakfast at sunrise, dinner at noon, supper at sunset. Basic fare is fine, nothing fancy. The men are used to beans, biscuits, bacon, and whatever beef we've got. If you can make a decent stew and coffee that doesn't taste like mud, you'll be a queen in their eyes." He paused. "You'd have Sundays mostly to yourself, except for setting out cold meals. Wages are $30 a month plus room and board." $30 a month. It was more than generous for a frontier cook, and she knew it. She studied his face, trying to understand why he would offer such favorable terms to a stranger. "That's very fair. My men work hard. They deserve decent food, and I believe in paying fair wages." He met her gaze directly. "I meant what I wrote on that paper. No questions asked. Your past is your own business, Miss Ross. All I care about is whether you can do the work and whether you'll be honest with me about the business of the ranch." She felt the weight of the signet ring against her chest, hidden beneath layers of fabric and secrets. Something in his directness called to her own buried honesty, the part of herself she had been forced to conceal and disguise. "I can do the work, Mr. Jameson. And I give you my word I will be honest about matters concerning the ranch." The careful phrasing was not lost on him. She saw recognition flicker in his eyes, but true to his word, he did not press her on what she had left unsaid. "Then we have an agreement. Welcome to the Silver Creek Ranch, Miss Ross." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. The contact lasted only a moment, but it sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Quinn introduced her to the ranch hands that evening. When they all gathered for the meal, she had hastily prepared from the available supplies. The men were a varied group. Tom and Billy were brothers from Kansas, both in their mid-20s, weathered and lean from outdoor work. Pete was an older man, probably near 50, with gray threading through his beard and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Jake was the youngest, barely 19, with an earnest face and an appetite that seemed bottomless. Carlos had come up from Texas, and his accent added a musical quality to his speech. And finally, there was Samuel, quiet and watchful, who seemed to serve as Quinn's second in command. They were respectful but curious, asking polite questions about where she had come from and what had brought her to Colorado. She deflected with vague answers about seeking new opportunities and wanting to see the West, and none of them pushed for details. Quinn sat at the head of the table, eating steadily, occasionally interjecting when the questions became too pointed, steering the conversation toward safer topics like the weather and the condition of the cattle. After the meal, when the men had dispersed to their various evening activities, Quinn helped her carry the dishes back to the kitchen. It was not something she expected from a ranch owner, but he did it without ceremony, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "They're good men," he said as he set a stack of plates near the washing basin. "They can be rough around the edges, but they'll treat you with respect. If anyone gives you trouble, you come directly to me. Thank you." She pumped water into the basin, preparing to tackle the washing. "They seem very loyal to you. I try to be fair, treat people right, and they'll generally do the same." He leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You did well tonight. The biscuits were better than anything George ever made, and he'd been cooking for 30 years. She felt an absurd flush of pleasure at the compliment. It was simple enough, though I confess I'm more accustomed to smaller gatherings. "Family dinners?" he asked casually. The question was innocent enough, but it touched on the life she was trying to escape. "Something like that." He was quiet for a moment, then pushed away from the counter. "I'll leave you to finish up. If you need anything, the main house is always open. I'm usually up before dawn to check on the horses." After he left, Lillian finished the dishes in silence, her mind turning over the strange turn her life had taken. A month ago, she had been planning her escape from Boston, stealing money from her own trust fund, carefully purchasing tickets under an assumed name. 2 weeks ago, she had been traveling west on trains and stagecoaches, terrified that every stranger might recognize her, that her uncle might have sent men to drag her back. Now she stood in a ranch kitchen in Colorado, washing dishes by lamplight, employed by a man who asked no questions and seemed content to accept her at face value. It should have felt like defeat, this fall from privilege to labor. Instead, it felt like the first honest work she had ever done. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely satisfying. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, timing the biscuits and bacon to be ready when the men came in from their early chores. Midday dinner was the largest meal, usually featuring beef stew or roasted meat with potatoes and whatever vegetables she could coax from the ranch's small garden. Supper was simpler, often leftover stew or beans with cornbread. Between meals, she cleaned the kitchen, planned menus, and occasionally helped with other tasks around the ranch when her cooking duties were done. The work was hard, harder than anything she had ever done in Boston. Her hands, already roughened from her brief time in town, became even more calloused. Her back ached from bending over the stove and kneading bread dough. But there was a satisfaction in it, in creating something tangible and useful, in seeing the appreciation on the men's faces when they sat down to a hot meal after a long day of labor. Quinn was a constant presence, though not in an intrusive way. He checked in each morning to let her know if any of the men would be away from the ranch, and thus not needing meals. He brought her supplies from town without being asked, somehow knowing when the flour was running low or the coffee beans needed replenishing. He fixed the door hinge on the cabin when it began to squeak, and reinforced the shelf that held her few books when it started to sag. They spoke in passing, brief exchanges about practical matters, but she found herself watching him when he did not know she was looking. The way he moved with unconscious grace, comfortable in his own skin in a way she had never been. The way he handled the horses with firm gentleness, speaking to them in low tones that seemed to calm even the most skittish animals. The way he treated his men with respect, but maintained clear authority, never needing to raise his voice to be heard. She told herself it was simple observation, natural curiosity about her employer. But she knew it was becoming something more when she found herself listening for his footsteps on the porch, when she took extra care with the meals she knew were his favorites, when her heart jumped at the sound of his voice calling her name. It was dangerous, this growing awareness. She could not afford attachments, could not risk anyone looking too closely at who she really was. Yet she could not seem to stop herself from responding to his presence, from feeling a warmth spread through her chest when he smiled at something she said, from lying awake at night remembering the timbre of his voice. One afternoon in late July, Quinn found her in the garden behind the kitchen, trying to salvage what she could from the drought-stressed plants. She was on her knees in the dirt, her shawl discarded in the heat, her sleeves rolled up past her elbows. She did not hear him approach until his shadow fell across the row of struggling beans. "You're fighting a losing battle there," he said, his tone sympathetic. "This soil needs more water than the summer rains provide." She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "I thought if I could keep them alive a bit longer, we might get enough for a few meals." He crouched down beside her, examining the wilted plants with a practiced eye. "There's a better spot near the creek about a quarter-mile east of here. The soil's richer and there's plenty of water. I've been meaning to fence it off for a proper garden, just haven't gotten around to it." "If you fence it, I'll tend it," she offered. Fresh vegetables would be a welcome change from dried beans and canned goods. "Deal." He stood, offering her his hand to help her up. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, acutely aware of the warmth of his palm against hers, the strength in his grip as he pulled her easily to her feet. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray-green eyes, could smell the scent of horse and leather and sun-warmed cotton that clung to him. He released her hand but did not step back. "Miss Ross, can I ask you something?" Her heart hammered against her ribs and she was certain he could hear it. "Of course. That shawl you always wear, even in this heat. There's something beneath it you're protecting, isn't there?" The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She instinctively pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the outline of the signet ring through the fabric of her dress. "I don't know what you mean. I think you do." His voice was gentle, without accusation. "I've seen the way you touch it when you're nervous or worried. The way you check to make sure it's still there. And sometimes, in certain light, I can see the outline of something on a chain beneath your dress." She should lie. She should deflect and deny and protect herself as she had been doing since the day she left Boston. But something in his steady gaze, in the patient way he waited for her response, made the lies stick in her throat. "It's nothing that concerns the ranch, but it concerns you." He took a careful step closer, his voice dropping lower. "Someone's looking for you, aren't they? Someone you're hiding from." Tears pricked at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back fiercely. "I can't talk about this. You don't have to tell me everything." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, and gently touched her shoulder. "But I want you to know that whatever you're running from, you're safe here. I don't care if you're running from a bad marriage, a dangerous family, or something else entirely. This ranch is a sanctuary for people who need one. You're not the first person to show up here with secrets, and you probably won't be the last." "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "Why would you protect someone you don't even know?" A shadow crossed his face, some old pain that he usually kept hidden. Because I know what it's like to run from a past you can't change, to need a place where you can just be yourself without judgment or expectations." He squeezed her shoulder gently, then let his hand fall away. "Your secret is safe with me, Miss Ross, whatever it is." She wanted to tell him everything in that moment. Wanted to pour out the whole story of her uncle's scheme, the arranged marriage, the escape that had left her penniless and alone. Wanted to show him the signet ring that marked her as Lady Lillian Rosewood, daughter of the late Earl of Rosewood, niece and ward to the current Earl. Wanted to ask him if he would still look at her the same way if he knew she was not just some anonymous woman seeking work, but a noblewoman who had abandoned her title and her duty. But fear held her tongue. The same fear that had driven her west, that kept her looking over her shoulder, that made her start at unexpected sounds. So instead, she simply nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and was grateful when he accepted her silence without pushing for more. The promised garden fence went up the following week, and Lillian threw herself into establishing the new plot with an energy born of both gratitude and the need for distraction. Quinn helped her prepare the soil, working alongside her in the early mornings before the heat became unbearable. They worked in companionable silence much of the time, but occasionally he would tell her stories about the ranch, about how he had come to Colorado 5 years earlier with nothing but a horse and a determination to build something of his own. "I was 23, he said one morning as they dug post holes for the fence. "Angry at the world and convinced I could do everything alone. Took me about 6 months to realize I was going to fail spectacularly if I didn't accept help. What changed?" She paused in her digging, wiping sweat from her face. Pride got worn down by necessity. He grinned, and the expression transformed his usually serious face into something younger and more carefree. "And I met Pete. He was working a claim up in the mountains, doing poorly at it, and I needed help with the ranch. We made a deal and he became my first hand. The others came gradually, men looking for honest work and a place to belong. You've built something good here," she said softly. "Something that matters." "I hope so." His expression sobered. Everyone deserves a place where they fit, where they're valued for what they contribute rather than where they came from or what mistakes they might have made in the past. She understood he was speaking about her as much as himself, offering reassurance without demanding confidences. It made something in her chest ache, this careful kindness from a man who barely knew her. As summer deepened, she found herself settling into life at the ranch in ways she had not anticipated. The rhythm of the work, the satisfaction of feeding hungry men, the quiet peace of the evenings when she could sit on her cabin porch and watch the stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. She even began to make friends with the ranch hands, learning their stories and their quirks. Tom could play the harmonica and often entertained after supper. Billy carved small figures from wood during his rare free time. Carlos taught her some Spanish words, laughing good-naturedly when she stumbled over the pronunciations. But it was Quinn who occupied more and more of her thoughts. She caught herself watching for him throughout the day, feeling a lift in her spirits when he appeared at the kitchen door. Their conversations grew longer, ranging from practical matters to books they had both read, to observations about the changing seasons and the behavior of the horses. She learned that he had grown up in Missouri, that he had served briefly in the army before coming west, that his parents were both dead and he had no siblings. He was 28, she learned, only 6 years older than herself. He made her laugh, something she had not done freely in months. He challenged her thinking, asking her opinions on matters large and small. He treated her as an equal despite the vast difference in their circumstances, never condescending or dismissive. And though he never pushed beyond the boundaries of propriety, She sometimes caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, and her skin flush warm. It was Pete who first commented on it, late one August evening after the others had gone to bed. She was banking the fire in the kitchen stove when he appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with a smile. "Quinn's a good man," he said without preamble. "Best man I ever worked for, and I've worked for a lot of men in my 52 years. She glanced up from the stove, uncertain where he was going with this observation. "He's been very fair to me. More than fair, I'd say. He watches out for you, makes sure you're not working too hard, that you've got what you need." Pete leaned against the doorframe, his expression knowing. "He doesn't do that for everyone. You're special to him, whether either of you has admitted it yet or not." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Pete, I don't think that's appropriate." "Maybe not, but it's true." He held up a hand to forestall her protest. "I'm not trying to embarrass you, Miss Lily. Just want you to know that whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from, you've got people here who care about you. Quinn most of all, I reckon. Just think about that." He left before she could respond, leaving her alone with her whirling thoughts and the echo of his words. You're special to him. Was it true? And if it was, what could possibly come of it? She was living under an assumed name, hiding her true identity, carrying secrets that could ruin both their lives if they came to light. She had no right to encourage any feelings Quinn might have, no right to her own growing attachment to him. But knowing she had no right did not stop her heart from racing when she saw him the next morning, did not stop the warmth that spread through her when he smiled and asked how she had slept. Did not stop her from imagining, in the dangerous privacy of her thoughts, what it might be like if she were free to love him without secrets between them. The crisis came on a hot afternoon in early September. Lillian was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Visitors were not common at the ranch, and something about the urgent pace of the hoofbeats made her set down her knife and move to the window. 4 men rode into the yard, their clothes dusty from travel, their bearing suggesting authority, or at least the assumption of it. The lead rider was a heavy-set man in his 40s, wearing a suit too fine and too formal for ranch work. Her heart stopped as she recognized him. Thomas Whitmore, her uncle's lawyer and most trusted associate. Panic surged through her. She stumbled back from the window, pressing her hand to her chest where the signet ring hung hidden. They had found her. After everything, after all her precautions, somehow they had tracked her to this remote ranch in Colorado. She heard Quinn's voice greeting the visitors, calm and professional. Heard the lawyer's response, clipped and officious. She could not make out the words, but she did not need to. They were looking for her, asking about her. And any moment now, Quinn would come to the kitchen and she would have to face the choice she had been dreading: run again, or stand and fight for the life she had built here. The kitchen door opened and Quinn stepped inside, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes sharp with concern. "Miss Ross, there are some men here who'd like to speak with you. They're looking for someone. A woman who disappeared from Boston about 3 months ago." Her throat was so tight she could barely force out words. "What did you tell them?" "That I employ a woman named Lily Ross who came to work here in June, and if they want to speak with her, they're welcome to ask their questions in my presence." He moved closer, his voice dropping lower. "You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to. I can send them away. They'll just come back, or send others." She drew in a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "I have to face this. Then we face it together." He held her gaze, and there was something fierce in his expression, something protective and certain. "Whatever happens, you're under my protection. Do you understand? No one takes you anywhere you don't want to go." The words should have seemed presumptuous, but instead they felt like a lifeline. She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat, and followed him out to the yard where the four men waited. Thomas Whitmore's eyes widened when he saw her, triumph flickering across his face. "Lady Lillian, we've been searching for you for months." She lifted her chin, calling on all the training that had been drilled into her since childhood. "My name is Lily Ross, Mr. Whitmore. I don't know who you think I am, but you're mistaken. Please don't insult my intelligence." He dismounted, approaching with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. "Your uncle has been frantic with worry. You disappeared without a word, leaving only a note saying you could not go through with the marriage. Do you have any idea the scandal you've caused?" "The scandal of refusing to marry a cruel man twice my age." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "The scandal of choosing my own life rather than being bartered away like property." Quinn moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "The lady says her name is Lily Ross, and that's good enough for me. If she doesn't want to go with you, then you're trespassing on my land." Whitmore's gaze shifted to Quinn, assessing and dismissive. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy." "Lady Lillian is under the guardianship of her uncle until she marries or reaches the age of 25. She has no legal right to refuse his decisions regarding her welfare." "This is Colorado, not Boston," Quinn said evenly. "Your Eastern laws don't hold the same weight out here. And from where I'm standing, Miss Ross is a grown woman capable of making her own choices." "Is she paying you?" Whitmore's tone turned ugly. "Did she offer you money to hide her? Because I can assure you any financial arrangement you have with her is null and void. She has no access to her funds without her uncle's permission. She works for her wages like everyone else on this ranch, and her money is her own business." Quinn's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. "You've said your piece. Time for you to leave." "We're not leaving without her." One of the other men moved forward, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Her uncle authorized us to use whatever means necessary to ensure her safe return." The threat hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Lillian felt Quinn tense beside her, felt the shift in his stance that suggested he was preparing for trouble. The ranch hands had emerged from various buildings, drawn by the commotion, and they moved to form a loose semicircle behind Quinn, their loyalty clear. "You really want to start something here?" Samuel's voice was quiet but dangerous. "4 of you against all of us. Those odds don't favor you, friend." Whitmore held up a hand, signaling his men to stand down. "This is absurd. Lady Lillian, be reasonable. Your uncle is willing to forgive this entire episode if you simply return with us. The engagement can be salvaged, your reputation restored. You'll want for nothing. Except freedom," she said bitterly. "Except choice. Except any say in my own future. You're being childish." His patience was clearly wearing thin. "You have responsibilities, obligations that come with your position. You cannot simply abandon them because you find them inconvenient. I can and I have." She reached beneath her shawl and pulled out the signet ring, letting it dangle from its chain in the sunlight. "This was my father's. It's the only thing of his I took when I left. Everything else, the title, the money, the social standing, I renounce it all. Give it to some distant cousin who actually wants the burden." "You can't renounce your heritage," Whitmore sputtered, his face reddening. "That's not how it works. Then let my uncle declare me dead or insane or whatever legal fiction allows him to move on. I am not returning to Boston, Mr. Whitmore. Not now, not ever." Quinn's hand found hers, his fingers warm and strong as they wrapped around her trembling ones. The gesture was unmistakable in its meaning, a public declaration of alliance. "You heard her. She's made her choice. Time for you gentlemen to respect it and leave." Whitmore looked between them, his expression shifting from anger to calculation. "I see. So it's like that, is it? You've taken up with this frontier nobody rather than marrying a respected gentleman of means and standing." "Watch your tongue," Quinn said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You're about 2 seconds from finding out just how much this frontier nobody is willing to tolerate." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension stretched tight as a wire, and Lillian held her breath, terrified that violence would erupt and someone would be hurt because of her choices, her rebellion, her desperate bid for freedom. Finally, Whitmore stepped back, his face rigid with fury. "Your uncle will hear of this. There will be legal consequences, financial consequences. Let him do his worst," Lillian said quietly. "I've already lost everything that mattered to him. I have nothing left for him to take." Whitmore and his men mounted their horses, and the lawyer fixed her with one last baleful glare. "You'll regret this, Lady Lillian. Mark my words." They rode away in a cloud of dust, and only when they had disappeared from sight did Lillian allow herself to sag against Quinn's solid presence. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her steady as tremors of delayed shock ran through her body. "You're all right," he murmured. "You're safe. They're gone." "They'll come back," she whispered, "or send others. My uncle won't give up that easily. Then we'll face them when they come." He turned her gently to face him, his hands firm on her shoulders. "But right now, I think you and I need to have a conversation. A real one with no more secrets between us." She nodded, unable to speak, and let him guide her to his office in the main house. The room was simple and functional, with a large desk, several chairs, and shelves lined with ledgers and books. He closed the door behind them, giving them privacy, and gestured for her to sit. For a long moment he simply stood looking at her, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled up a chair and sat facing her, his knees almost touching hers. "Lady Lillian Rosewood, that's your real name?" Yes. There was no point in denying it now. "My father was the Earl of Rosewood. He died 2 years ago, and my uncle became my guardian as well as the new Earl. He arranged my engagement to a man named Lord Pemberton, who is 47 years old and known for his cruelty to his servants and his first wife, who died under suspicious circumstances." The words tumbled out now, a flood released after months of being dammed up. "I was expected to marry him, to merge our family's fortunes and social connections. I tried to refuse, but my uncle made it clear I had no choice, so I ran." "That took courage," Quinn said softly, "leaving everything you knew, traveling alone across the country. Or cowardice, depending on how you look at it." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I abandoned my responsibilities, my duty to my family name. Your family name wasn't worth preserving if it required you to sacrifice your happiness and safety." He leaned forward, capturing her restless hands in his. "You made the right choice, Lillian." The sound of her real name on his lips made her heart clench. "I lied to you, deceived you about who I was. You told me your name was Lily Ross, which is close enough to the truth. You never claimed to be anything other than a woman looking for work and a fresh start. That's not deception, that's survival." His thumbs stroked across the backs of her hands, the touch gentle and grounding. "Do you trust me, Lillian?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, surprising her with its certainty. "I trust you, Quinn. Then trust me when I say that nothing you've told me changes how I feel about you." He hesitated, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. "I've been trying to keep my distance, to respect your privacy and not push for more than you were willing to give. But I can't pretend anymore, not after today. You matter to me, Lillian, more than any woman has mattered to me in a very long time." Her breath caught in her throat. "Quinn, I can't ask you to involve yourself in my problems. The legal complications alone, I don't give a damn about legal complications." His voice was fierce now, passionate in a way she had never heard from him. "I care about you. About the woman who works herself to exhaustion to feed my men good meals. About the woman who fights to keep a garden alive in drought-stricken soil. About the woman who faced down 4 men in my yard and refused to let them bully her into giving up the life she chose for herself." "I'm a mess," she whispered. "A runaway with no money, no prospects, and powerful enemies who want to drag me back to a life I can't bear. You're brave and stubborn and capable, and you've built yourself a new life from nothing in a matter of months." He raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her work-roughened knuckles. "I know I'm just a cowboy with a small ranch and no fancy title, but if you'll have me, I'll stand between you and anyone who tries to take your freedom from you. I'll fight beside you for the life you want to build, and I'll count myself the luckiest man in Colorado if you'll give me the chance to prove I can make you happy." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were tears of relief rather than fear. "I don't deserve you. That's the most ridiculous thing you've said all day, and you've had a very eventful day." He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, burying her face against his shoulder as he held her close. "We deserve each other, Lillian. 2 people trying to build something better than what we were given. 2 people brave enough or foolish enough to try." She pulled back just far enough to see his face, to read the truth in those sage-colored eyes. "I'm falling in love with you, Quinn Jameson. I didn't mean to, and I tried not to, but I can't seem to help myself." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, bright and full of promise. "Good. Because I've been halfway in love with you since the day you showed up in my yard looking fierce and frightened and determined all at once." He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she were something precious that might break. But she was done with being careful, done with holding back out of fear. She kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and relief and joy that had been building in her chest for weeks. His arms tightened around her, and for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt truly safe, truly home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "Whatever legal trouble your uncle tries to cause, we'll face it together." "Together," she agreed, and the word felt like a vow. The next few weeks were a strange mixture of happiness and anxiety. Lillian moved through her days on the ranch with a lightness she had never known, warmed by the knowledge of Quinn's love and the promise of a future together. He made no secret of his feelings for her, and the ranch hands accepted their courtship with good-natured teasing and sincere well-wishes. But underneath, the happiness lay the constant worry that Whitmore would return, that her uncle would find some legal means to force her back to Boston, that everything she had built would be torn away. Quinn consulted with a lawyer in Rico, a shrewd man named Abernathy who had some experience with Eastern property law. The news was not entirely encouraging. Under current law, Lillian's uncle did have significant legal authority over her until she married or reached 25. He could potentially bring charges of theft if he claimed she had taken anything of value when she left, could freeze any funds she might try to access, could even petition a court to have her declared incompetent and forcibly returned to his custody. "However," Abernathy said, his eyes twinkling with sharp intelligence, "those laws are easier to enforce in Boston than in Colorado. The courts out here tend to take a dim view of Eastern aristocrats trying to impose their will on frontier women, especially if said woman is clearly of sound mind and making her own choices, and especially if she has local allies willing to vouch for her." "So what do we do?" Quinn asked, his hand finding Lillian's under the table where they sat in Abernathy's office. "Marry her," Abernathy said bluntly. If Lady Lillian becomes Mrs. Jameson, her uncle's guardianship is terminated. She would have full legal autonomy as a married woman, at least as much autonomy as any married woman has. Her husband would become her legal representative rather than her uncle. Lillian felt her face flush. She and Quinn had spoken of marriage in abstract terms, as something that might happen in the future if they could resolve her legal troubles. But hearing it laid out so practically, as a legal solution rather than a romantic commitment, made it feel both more real and more overwhelming. "We've only been courting a few weeks," she said quietly. "I don't want Quinn to feel obligated to marry me just to protect me from my uncle." "Is that what you think this would be?" Quinn turned in his chair to face her fully, his expression intense. "An obligation, isn't it?" Lillian Rosewood. He took both her hands in his, unmindful of the lawyer watching with poorly concealed interest. "I want to marry you because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you in it, because when I think about my future, you're in every single vision of it. The legal protection is just a convenient benefit of something I already want more than anything." "But it's so fast," she protested weakly, even as her heart soared at his words. "People will talk. They'll say you only married me for my title or my family's money. Let them talk. I don't care what anyone thinks except you." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "I know this is fast by conventional standards, but nothing about our situation is conventional, and I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am about wanting to marry you." She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but absolute sincerity. This man who had given her refuge without questions, who had defended her against those who would force her back into chains of duty and obligation, who had shown her what it meant to be valued for herself rather than her name or her family status. He was offering her not just protection but partnership, not just security but love. "Then yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes, Quinn, I'll marry you." Abernathy cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "Excellent. I would recommend proceeding quickly, before your uncle has time to pursue any legal action. I can arrange for a judge to perform the ceremony as early as this weekend if you're agreeable." 3 days later, on a bright Saturday morning in late September, Lillian Rosewood became Mrs. Quinn Jameson in a simple ceremony at the courthouse in Rico. She wore her best dress, which was still simple and practical compared to the elaborate gown she had once owned, and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Pete had gathered from the meadows near the ranch. Quinn wore clean clothes and a serious expression that melted into pure joy when the judge pronounced them married, and gave him permission to kiss his bride. All the ranch hands attended, along with several townspeople who had befriended her during her brief time in Rico, before coming to the ranch. Mrs. Patterson from the Mercantile cried openly, declaring it the most romantic thing she had ever witnessed. Even gruff old Abernathy looked pleased as he filed the marriage certificate that would serve as Lillian's legal protection against her uncle's machinations. The wedding breakfast was held at the ranch, with everyone contributing dishes and Carlos providing music on his guitar. It was nothing like the elaborate society wedding Lillian would have had in Boston, with hundreds of guests and formal protocols and speeches that went on for hours. This was real and warm, and filled with people who genuinely cared about her and Quinn, who celebrated their union because they wanted happiness for two people they respected, not because of social obligation or political advantage. That night, in the privacy of Quinn's room in the main house, their room now, he held her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Truly happy. Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. "I never imagined that running away from one life would lead me to something so much better. "You're the best thing that ever walked into my yard," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Even when I thought you were just a mysterious woman with sad eyes and a talent for biscuits." She laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "And you're the best thing that ever offered me a job with no questions asked." "I had questions," he admitted. "So many questions, but I figured you'd answer them when you were ready, or not at all if that's what you needed. I'm ready now." She shifted in his arms to face him fully. "Ask me anything." They talked through the night, sharing stories and secrets and dreams. She told him about growing up in a grand house with servants and tutors, about feeling like a stranger in her own life, always performing for others rather than being herself. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera, about the restlessness that had driven him west to find a place where he could build something of his own. "I never felt like I belonged anywhere until I came here," he confessed. "Until I built this ranch and gathered these men who became like family. And then you arrived, and suddenly I understood what had been missing all along." "What was missing?" she asked softly. "Someone to share it with, someone to build a future with, not just a present." He kissed her slowly, deeply. "You, Lillian, you were what was missing." The autumn passed in a golden haze of happiness. Lillian settled into her role as Quinn's wife with the same determination she had brought to her work as his cook. She continued to prepare meals for the ranch hands. But now, she also took on management of the household finances, bringing her education and organizational skills to bear on streamlining the ranch's operations. Quinn valued her input, frequently asking her opinions on decisions large and small, treating her as a true partner rather than a decorative accessory. The legal threats they had feared never materialized. Abernathy sent official notification of the marriage to Lillian's uncle, along with a strongly worded letter indicating that any attempts to interfere with Mrs. Jameson's life would be met with vigorous legal resistance. Whether cowed by the distance and difficulty of pursuing the matter, or simply deciding that his troublesome niece was more problem than she was worth, the Earl of Rosewood made no further attempts to contact her. Winter came to Colorado in swirls of snow and biting winds. The ranch settled into its cold weather rhythms, with the men spending more time maintaining equipment and tending to the horses and cattle that required extra care in the harsh conditions. Lillian transformed the main house into a warm haven, with fires burning in the hearths and the smell of baking bread perfuming the air. She had never been so content, so certain of her place in the world. On a snowy evening in January, as they sat together by the fire after supper, Quinn took her hand and placed it over his heart. "I have something for you." He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a pendant shaped like a mountain range. "I had it made in town," he explained. "The jeweler crafted it to match the view of the peaks from our bedroom window. I wanted you to have something that represents your new life, your new home." She fastened it around her neck with trembling fingers, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful, Quinn. Thank you. There's one more thing." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I've been thinking about that signet ring you hide beneath your shawl, the one that connects you to a past you left behind." She instinctively touched her chest, where the ring still hung on its chain. She had not taken it off, unable to completely sever that last connection to her father and the life she had once known. "I'm not asking you to give it up," Quinn said quickly. "It was your father's, and I know it means something to you. But I thought maybe you'd like to have a choice about how you carry it." He opened the pouch and poured its contents into his palm. A plain gold wedding band that matched the one she already wore, but this one had a small compartment built into the band, just large enough to hold the signet ring safely inside. "This way," he explained. "You can keep it with you always, but hidden in a way that doesn't require you to maintain that separation between who you were and who you are now. The past and the present, together but transformed." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she understood the profound symbolism of what he was offering. Not a rejection of her history, but an integration of it into her new identity. She removed the chain from around her neck and handed him the signet ring, watching as he carefully fitted it into the specially designed band. He slipped it onto her finger alongside her wedding ring, and she looked down at the two bands together, the visible and the hidden, the present and the past reconciled at last. "Perfect," she whispered. "It's perfect." Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. The cattle gave birth to calves, the horses to foals, and in early March, Lillian realized that she too was carrying new life. She was both thrilled and terrified, acutely aware of her own mother's death in childbirth, of the risks that frontier life posed to women in her condition. Quinn was overjoyed when she told him, but his joy was tempered with concern that matched her own. "We'll go to Denver when the time comes," he decided. "There are proper doctors there, a hospital. I'm not taking any chances with your health or the baby's." "That's 3 months away at least," she protested, "and the ranch needs you. The ranch will survive a few weeks without me. You're more important." His tone left no room for argument. "I've already lost too many people I love. I'm not losing you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. Lillian continued her work as long as she was able, finally accepting help from the ranch hands when her growing belly made it difficult to manage the heavy cooking pots and hours of standing. The men treated her with endearing protectiveness, competing to help with tasks and fussing over her comfort in ways that made her laugh even as she appreciated their concern. True to his word, Quinn took her to Denver in late July, as her time grew near. They stayed in a comfortable hotel near the hospital, and when her labor began on a hot August evening, Quinn held her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and promises and love. Their daughter was born just after midnight, a tiny perfect creature with dark hair and her father's eyes. They named her Catherine Rose, after Quinn's mother and Lillian's middle name. Holding her daughter for the first time, Lillian felt a fierce surge of love so powerful it was almost frightening. This child would never be bartered or sold for family advantage. This child would choose her own path, make her own decisions, live her own life. "She's beautiful," Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion as he touched one tiny perfect hand. "Just like her mother." They returned to the ranch 3 weeks later to a celebration that would have put some society parties to shame. The ranch hands had decorated the house with wildflowers and ribbons, and Mrs. Patterson had organized the town ladies to prepare enough food for an army. Catherine was passed around and cooed over and declared the prettiest baby anyone had ever seen. Life settled into a new rhythm, built around the demands of an infant and the ongoing work of the ranch. Lillian marveled at how her days, once filled with meaningless social calls and needlework, and the endless preparations for events designed to show off her family's status, were now consumed with real work that mattered. Feeding her child, supporting her husband, contributing to a community that valued her for what she did rather than who her ancestors had been. 2 years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Catherine grew into a lively toddler with her father's adventurous spirit and her mother's stubborn determination. A second daughter, Sarah Jane, arrived in the spring of 1881, this one blessed with blonde hair and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. The ranch prospered under Quinn and Lillian's joint management. Word spread about the quality of their horses and the fairness of their dealings, and they were able to expand their operation, hiring additional hands and purchasing more land. Lillian's education proved invaluable as she managed the increasingly complex finances and correspondence, while Quinn's skill with horses and cattle, combined with his fair treatment of workers, built a reputation that drew the best men in the territory to seek employment at Silver Creek Ranch. One autumn afternoon in 1882, a fancy carriage pulled up to the ranch house, so out of place in the rugged landscape that Lillian's first instinct was fear. But the man who emerged was not her uncle or any agent of his. He was younger, perhaps 30, with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. "Mrs. Jameson," he approached hesitantly, hat in hand. "My name is James Rosewood. I'm your cousin, though we've never met. I apologize for arriving unannounced." Lillian stood on the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly. She was pregnant again, though only a few months along, and studied this unexpected relative. "What brings you to Colorado, Mr. Rosewood?" "Your uncle passed away 6 months ago," James said gently. "Heart failure. And in settling his estate, I discovered correspondence that suggested he knew where you were but had chosen not to pursue the matter after your marriage. I thought you should know, and I wanted to meet the cousin who had the courage to choose her own path." Quinn appeared at Lillian's side, his presence protective but not aggressive. "You've traveled a long way to deliver news that could have been sent by letter." "True enough," James smiled, "but I also wanted to see for myself that Lady Lillian Mrs. Jameson rather was truly happy and well cared for. The family has been divided on the matter of your flight from Boston. Some think you brought shame on the name. Others, myself included, believe you were incredibly brave to refuse a marriage that would have made you miserable." "I'm happy," Lillian said simply. "Happier than I ever could have been in Boston. I can see that." James's gaze took in the well-maintained ranch, the evidence of prosperity and care, the way Quinn stood beside her with obvious devotion. "There is one other matter. Your father's estate was never properly settled. Your uncle held it in trust, but with his death and your marriage, you're entitled to access the funds. It's not a fortune by Boston standards, but it's substantial. I've brought the papers for you to sign if you're interested." Lillian exchanged a glance with Quinn. They had built the ranch through hard work and careful management, never needing or wanting money from her former life. But funds meant opportunities, better education for their children, improvements to the ranch, security against the uncertainties of frontier life. "We'll look at the papers," Quinn said, "but Lillian's happiness and safety are not negotiable. If accessing those funds means opening doors to people who would try to impose their will on our lives, we're not interested." "I understand completely." James pulled an envelope from his coat. "Everything can be handled through correspondence with my law office. No need for you to ever return east if you don't wish to. And I can assure you that Lord Pemberton, the man you were meant to marry, found another heiress to torment. He has no interest in you whatsoever." They invited James to stay for dinner, and over the meal he shared news of family and friends from Lillian's old life. Some of it saddened her beloved servants who had passed, friends who had married unhappily, but most of it simply reinforced how right her choice had been. That life, with all its constraints and expectations, would have crushed her spirit eventually. Here, in this wild, beautiful place with this strong, gentle man beside her and their children growing up free, she had found herself. James departed the next day with signed papers and an open invitation to return whenever he wished. "You've built something remarkable here," he told them as he climbed into his carriage. "I hope you know how rare it is, what you have together." "We do," Quinn assured him, his arm around Lillian's waist. "We absolutely do." The years continued to unfold in patterns of work and love and growing family. Their third child was another daughter, Emma Grace, born in the spring of 1883. 2 years later came their only son, Daniel Quinn, who inherited his father's name and his mother's determination. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the operation continued to prosper. Lillian never forgot the nobility she had been born into, but it became simply a part of her history rather than a defining characteristic. She was Quinn's wife, mother to their children, partner in building something that would last generations. The signet ring stayed safe in its hidden compartment in her wedding band, a private reminder of where she had come from and how far she had traveled. Catherine grew into a poised young woman who loved horses as much as her father did. Sarah became known throughout the territory for her skill with numbers and helped manage the ranch's accounts alongside her mother. Emma showed an early talent for drawing and painting, capturing the wild beauty of Colorado in sketches that covered every available wall. And Daniel, the baby, grew strong and stubborn and tender-hearted, beloved by his sisters and adored by his parents. On their 10th anniversary, Quinn took Lillian riding up into the mountains to a meadow filled with wildflowers, the same meadow where he had proposed marriage all those years ago. They dismounted and sat together on a sun-warmed boulder, looking out over the ranch spread below them. "Do you ever regret it?" Quinn asked quietly. "Giving up everything you had in Boston?" "Never." She leaned against him, comfortable in the familiarity of his embrace. "I didn't give up anything that mattered. I gained everything that does. You gave up a title, a fortune, a life of ease. I traded empty prestige for real partnership. I traded wealth I couldn't control for prosperity we built together. I traded a life of useless leisure for meaningful work." She turned to look at him, this man who had offered her sanctuary when she needed it most, who had loved her without conditions or expectations. "I traded loneliness for love, Quinn. How could I possibly regret that?" He kissed her then, as sweetly as he had on their wedding day, as passionately as he had the night their first child was conceived. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, he touched the mountain pendant that still hung around her neck, worn smooth by years of wear. "You know what I treasure most?" he asked. "Not just that you chose me, but that you chose this life, that you saw what we could build together and decided it was worth fighting for." "We," she emphasized. "Not just me, you fought too. You stood up to those men. You married me knowing it would bring complications. You've supported every dream and ambition I've had. This life we've built, it's ours together." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Then they rode home together to the ranch, where their children waited and their future stretched out bright and certain before them. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Droughts that tested the ranch's resources, harsh winters that required careful management of feed and shelter, the inevitable conflicts with neighbors over water rights and boundary lines. But Quinn and Lillian faced each obstacle as they faced everything. Together, with mutual respect and unwavering support for each other, their children grew and flourished. Catherine married a kind young rancher from the next valley over, a man whose gentle nature and strong work ethic earned Quinn's immediate approval and Lillian's deep gratitude. Sarah shocked the family by expressing interest in studying law, and with the funds from Lillian's father's estate, they sent her to university in Denver, where she became one of the first women to practice law in Colorado. Emma's artistic talent eventually led to a position teaching art at a school in Rico, where she inspired countless children to see the beauty in their wild surroundings. And Daniel, after considering various paths, ultimately chose to stay and run the ranch alongside his father, ensuring that the legacy Quinn and Lillian had built would continue into the next generation. On a warm summer evening in 1898, 20 years after that fateful day when Lillian had first arrived at Silver Creek Ranch, the extended family gathered for a celebration. Catherine and her husband brought their 3 children. Sarah came from Denver with exciting news about a case she had won. Emma arrived with sketches of a new commission she had been hired to complete. And Daniel, now engaged to a sharp-minded young woman from town, helped Quinn manage the festivities. Lillian watched it all from the porch of the house she and Quinn had built together, expanded and improved over the years, but still fundamentally the same home where they had discovered love. Her hair was threaded with gray now, her hands showing the marks of decades of work. But her eyes were bright, and her smile was genuine as she surveyed the family she had helped create. Quinn came to stand beside her, his own hair more gray than dark now, his face weathered by sun and wind but still achingly dear to her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist in the familiar gesture that still made her heart warm after all these years. "About a frightened girl with a noble crest hidden beneath her shawl," she said softly. "About a cowboy who whispered that her secret was safe." "Best decision I ever made," he murmured, "telling you that. Second best was convincing you to marry me. You didn't have to convince me very hard, true. You were already halfway in love with me by then." She laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "Arrogant man." "Confident man," he corrected. "There's a difference." They stood together watching their children and grandchildren, listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation that filled the evening air. This was the life they had built from courage and love, from 2 people brave enough to reach for something better than what they had been given. "You know what I treasure most?" Lillian asked, echoing his question from years ago. "Tell me." "That I found you. That in running from one life, I stumbled into the arms of the one person who could show me what life was really meant to be." She touched the ring on her finger, where her father's signet still rested hidden, integrated seamlessly with the symbol of her marriage. "You gave me more than sanctuary, Quinn. You gave me partnership, respect, love without conditions, freedom to be myself." "You gave me the same," he said, his voice rough with emotion even after all these years. "You made this ranch into a home. You turned my dream into our dream. You gave me children I'm proud of, and a life I wake up grateful for every single morning." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Quinn and Lillian Jameson stood together surrounded by the family and the legacy they had created. The frightened noblewoman who had once fled Boston had become a confident ranch wife and mother. The lonely cowboy who had once thought himself destined for solitude had found partnership and love beyond his wildest imaginings. Their story had begun with secrets and fear, with a desperate flight from an intolerable future. But it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting, proof that courage and love could overcome any obstacle, could build something remarkable from the roughest of beginnings. Daniel raised a glass in toast to his parents, and the gathered family echoed the gesture. "To Quinn and Lillian Jameson," he said, his voice carrying across the porch and yard, "for showing us all what it means to build a life worth living." "To Quinn and Lillian," everyone repeated, and the sound of their voices carried on the evening breeze like a blessing. That night, after the guests had departed and the house had settled into quiet, Quinn and Lillian lay together in their bed, hands intertwined as they had been for 20 years of nights. Through the window, they could see the mountain peaks silhouetted against a sky full of stars, the same view they had watched together through seasons of drought and plenty, through times of struggle and times of abundance. No regrets. Quinn asked, as he sometimes still did, though he knew the answer. Not a single one, Lillian assured him, as she always did. Only gratitude. For what? For you. For this. She gestured to encompass not just the room, but everything beyond it. The ranch, the family, the life they had built from courage and determination and love. For the day, a cowboy whispered that my secret was safe, and then proceeded to show me that I didn't need to hide anymore. You never did, he murmured, pulling her closer. You just needed the space to discover who you really were. And you gave me that space, along with your heart, your name, and your unfailing support. They fell asleep as they had for 20 years, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other something rare and precious. The noblewoman and the cowboy, the runaway and the refuge giver, now simply partners in a life well lived and a love that had stood the test of time. Years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren, more changes to the ranch and the territory around it. Colorado achieved statehood, and with it came modernizations that would have seemed like magic to the young woman who had first arrived in Rico all those years ago. But through all the changes, Silver Creek Ranch remained a constant, a testament to what two people could build when they faced the world together. Catherine's children grew up learning to ride and rope alongside Daniel's children. Sarah's legal work helped protect the rights of women across the state, ensuring that others would have the choices and freedoms that Lillian had been forced to fight for. Emma's art hung in galleries and homes throughout Colorado, capturing the wild beauty that had captivated her mother the first time she saw the mountains. And Daniel ran the ranch with the same combination of strength and compassion that his father had always demonstrated, ensuring that the Silver Creek name remained synonymous with fair dealing and quality stock. On their 30th anniversary, Quinn surprised Lillian with a journey. Not east to Boston, neither of them had any desire to revisit that life, but west to California, to see the Pacific Ocean she had only read about in books. They traveled by train now, comfortable and easy, so different from her desperate flight westward 3 decades earlier. Standing on the beach with the vast ocean stretching before them and Quinn's hand warm in hers, Lillian thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened girl clutching a signet ring beneath a borrowed shawl to a confident woman whose life was filled with purpose and love, the transformation had been complete. "Thank you," she said to Quinn, her voice nearly lost in the sound of the waves, "for bringing you here, for everything. For seeing me when I was trying so hard to be invisible, for offering me work when you knew I was hiding something, for loving me when I finally stopped hiding." She turned to face him, this man who had been her partner and her home for 3 decades, "for building this life with me." He cupped her face in his hands, weathered and strong, the hands that had worked beside her to build everything they had. "The pleasure and the honor have been entirely mine, Lady Lillian." She smiled at the old title, which held no power over her anymore, which had become nothing more than a memory of a different person in a different life. "Just Lillian, or Mrs. Jameson if you must be formal, my Lillian," he amended. "Always and forever, my Lillian." They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to embrace whatever years remained to them. Quinn's health remained strong despite his advancing years, and Lillian discovered that a lifetime of hard work had built strength into her frame that served her well in her 50s. They worked side by side as they always had, training horses, managing accounts, welcoming grandchildren, and offering advice to their adult children navigating their own paths through life. On quiet evenings, they still sat together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories and observations. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, speaking without words in the language that decades of partnership had created. And always, always, they held hands, connected by touch as surely as they were connected by love. The turn of the century came, bringing with it new technologies and new challenges. Automobiles began appearing on the roads, telephones connected distant towns, and the old frontier ways began giving way to something more modern. But at Silver Creek Ranch, the core values remained unchanged. Hard work, fair dealing, family loyalty, and the understanding that true wealth was measured in relationships rather than gold. Quinn passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by family, his hand clasped in Lillian's. The grief was profound, but so was the gratitude for 50 years of partnership, for a love that had begun with a whispered promise of safety and had grown into something that had shaped multiple generations. Lillian lived another 5 years after Quinn's death, staying active and engaged with the ranch and the family until her final days. She died at 77, sitting in her favorite chair on the porch, looking out at the mountains she had come to love as much as she had loved the man who had made this place her home. The family buried her beside Quinn on a hillside overlooking the ranch, in a spot they had chosen together years before. The simple headstone bore her chosen name, Lillian Jameson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. No mention of nobility or titles, just the roles that had defined her real life, the life she had built from courage and choice. But hidden in her coffin, resting over her heart, was the signet ring that had belonged to her father. The ring she had clutched beneath her shawl on a dusty afternoon in Rico, terrified and hopeful and desperate for a new beginning. The ring that had been hidden in her wedding band for 50 years, a private reminder of where she had come from and how far she had traveled. The Silver Creek Ranch continued to prosper under Daniel's management, and eventually under his children's management after him. The story of how it all began with a frightened noblewoman and a cowboy who offered sanctuary became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. A reminder that courage and love could overcome any obstacle, that the life you chose was worth more than the life you were born into, and that true nobility lay not in titles or bloodlines, but in how you treated others and the legacy you left behind. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the pines and the mountains glowed golden in the setting sun, those who lived on the ranch swore they could feel the presence of the couple who had built it all. Quinn and Lillian, still together even in death, still watching over the family and the land they had loved so well. Still proof that a whispered promise, "Your secret is safe," could be the beginning of something extraordinary. The love story that had begun with secrecy and fear had transformed into a legacy of openness and courage, touching lives across generations. It had started with a noblewoman hiding her crest beneath her shawl, and a cowboy wise enough to offer protection without questions. But it had become so much more. A partnership that weathered every storm, a love that deepened with every passing year, and a family that stood as testament to what two people could build when they chose each other freely and loved each other faithfully. That was the true nobility, the real legacy. Not titles granted by accident of birth, but character forged through choice and commitment. Not wealth inherited without effort, but prosperity earned through hard work and fair dealing. Not a name that commanded respect through historical associations, but a reputation built on integrity and kindness that earned respect one interaction at a time. In the end, Lady Lillian Rosewood had found something far more valuable than any title or fortune could provide. She had found herself, her purpose, and her truest love in the arms of a cowboy who had seen past her disguise to the woman beneath. And together, they had built a life that mattered, a legacy that endured, and a love story that would be remembered and cherished for generations to come. The sun set behind the mountains one final time in this story, painting the sky in brilliant shades of crimson and gold, while the Silver Creek Ranch settled into evening peace. Somewhere in the gathering dusk, if you listened carefully, you might have heard the echo of a whispered promise carried on the wind. Your secret is safe. And in the warmth of that promise, in the enduring legacy of the love it sparked, was proof that the best endings were not really endings at all, but beginnings that stretched forward into an unknowable but hopeful future, blessed by the courage of those who came before.